The cockpit air was too thin, too cold. Hypoxia's fuzzy edges crept into her vision. Captain Eva Rostova forced a steady, measured breath, the rubber mask clamping against her sweat-slicked skin. Below her, the mountain range was a jagged black scar against the grainy green glow of her night vision goggles. Reaper 1-1, Mace 6, they're inside the wire. They are inside the wire. I say again, we are being overrun. The voice in her headset wasn't professional anymore. It was raw panic, shredded by static and the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of heavy machine gun fire. Her A-10’s, the Hog, vibrated, a low rumble of power held in check. Mace, copy overrun, she said, her own voice shockingly calm, detached. I need you to confirm danger close. The 31 is a 2,000-pound solution. I cannot drop it unless you confirm. We don't have time for confirmation. They're... Gah! A scream. Gunfire. They're 10 meters from the bunker. We are dead. Just drop it. Drop it. Eva's gaze fixed on the target coordinates glowing on her HUD. The bunker. The friendlies. The red circle of the calculated fragmentation radius overlapped them entirely. This wasn't support. This was annihilation. Mace, she transmitted, her left hand already moving to the store's management panel, selecting the GBU-31. Confirm. Are you ordering me to fire on your position? A single, desperate word cut through the static. Yes. Her thumb hovered over the red pickle button on the joystick, the plastic worn smooth. One press. A solution that would save them by obliterating them. Her breath hitched. 48 hours earlier, forward operating base Guardian. The projector in the briefing room hummed, a low, constant vibration that settled beneath the skin. It cast a dull white rectangle onto the map, outlining the Sarakul Valley in stark red ink. Captain Eva Rostova, call sign Reaper, kept her eyes fixed on the red lines. She did not look at the faces of the intel officers. She did not look at the other pilots in the room. The F-16 drivers trading quiet jokes, their flight suits still smelling of the morning's dry air. Eva smelled of recycled oxygen and solitude. The objective is ODA Mace, the wing commander said, his voice flat. Colonel Jensen. They are deep cover, mapping insurgent networks moving through these passes. They are not equipped for sustained contact. Eva's hands rested on her knees. Her flight gloves, worn smooth at the knuckles, were perfectly aligned. She focused on the grain of the leather. Air assets, Jensen continued, will be on a 24-hour alert posture. This is high-risk, low-visibility support. The rules of engagement are restrictive. We are not to provoke a border incident. He paused, and Eva felt the shift in the room's temperature. The collective gaze, including Jensen's, settled on her. Captain Rostova, you're pulling first alert. A simple statement, but it landed with the weight of an accusation. The F-16 pilots shifted, their quiet jokes ceasing. They knew her loadout. They knew her call sign. Sir, a major near the front ventured, is Mace aware of the asset limitations? Limitations, a polite word for her. They are, Jensen said, his eyes still locked on Eva. Your loadout, Captain, includes 2 GBU-31s. Let me be unequivocally clear. Those are for strategic targets only. Bunkers, bridges, command centers. They are not for troops in contact. They are overkill. Do you copy me, Reaper? Yes, sir. Her voice was low, betraying nothing. It was the same voice she used to confirm coordinates. Overkill. The word Operation Cinder hung unspoken in the stale air. Cinder had been a textbook strike. A 2,000-pound JDAM dropped from 20,000 feet onto a verified insurgent command vehicle. The intelligence was perfect. The drop was perfect. The problem wasn't the strike, it was the perception. The vehicle had been parked next to a dry irrigation ditch. The blast wave, channeled by the concrete, had leveled a small clinic 200 meters away. A catastrophic success. Since then, Reaper had become overkill in the quiet whispers of the talk and the skeptical radio checks from ground teams. Eva stood, grabbing her helmet bag. The briefing was over. The other pilots filed out, giving her a wide berth. She was a professional liability, a blunt instrument in a surgeon's war. She walked the flight line under the oppressive glare of the desert sun. The heat radiated up from the tarmac, shimmering in waves. Her A-10’s sat waiting, ugly, functional, lethal. It was a relic from a different war, much like she felt she was. Her crew chief, Sergeant Diaz, met her at the ladder. He didn't smile. He just nodded toward the port side pylon. "She's heavy today, ma'am." Eva looked up. The GBU-31 was massive. A 2,000-pound cylinder of gray steel, stenciled with yellow letters. It was almost as wide as her aircraft's fuselage. It looked obscene. "It's a strategic load, Sergeant," she said, the official words tasting like dust. "Right. Strategic." Diaz tapped the bomb's casing. "Just try and bring this one back, ma'am. It's a pain in the ass to load." It was the closest thing to gallows humor he ever managed. Eva gave him a curt nod and began her pre-flight. She strapped into the titanium bathtub of the cockpit, the cramped space her world. Avionics whirred to life. The HUD glowed green. She began her systems check. Her movements economical, precise. Each switch, each button, a familiar touchstone. The pre-mission comms check crackled in her headset. First, the AWACS, magic, then the ground element. May 6, this is Reaper 1-1, radio check on station." A long pause. Then a voice, tight with static and suspicion. "Reaper 1-1, I copy. Thought they were sending a gunship, not a bomber." Eva's jaw tightened. She keyed the mic, her voice pure. Procedure. "May 6, Reaper 1-1 is a multi-role attack aircraft. I have a full complement of 30mm plus 500-pound and 2,000-pound GPS-guided munitions. How copy?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Copy. Bomber. Just keep your altitude, Reaper. And keep those 2,000-pounders on safe. We're surgical down here." The transmission cut. Eva stared through the armored glass of her canopy at the endless, shimmering horizon. Surgical. He had no idea. She was the most precise pilot in the theater. She had to be. Because when you fly an A-10 and your call sign is Reaper, everyone expects a scythe. And when you carry a 2,000-pound bomb, they only see the overkill. She pushed the throttles forward, the twin engines whining to a roar. The heavy jet lumbered down the runway, fighting the weight of the very weapons she was forbidden to use. The A-10 punched through the last layer of hazy cumulus, the Sarakul Valley opening below her like a topographical map carved from dust and rock. Eva Rostova leveled her wings at 15,000 feet, a solitary speck of gray steel in an ocean of pale blue. Her world was the green glow of the HUD and the digital hum of the targeting pod, TGP. She slaved the TGP to the coordinates Mace 6 had transmitted. The sensor ball rotated, zoomed. The image stabilized, resolving from a blur of pixels into a stark, infrared reality. The ODA was dug in behind a low stone wall, a sangur that looked like it had been part of a shepherd's pen a century ago. It offered minimal cover. 4 men, clustered around a small antenna and a .50 caliber machine gun. 300 meters upslope, nestled in a cluster of granite boulders, she saw it. A flicker of heat, a spider hole. then another 50 meters to the east. Ping, 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 ping. The sound was sharp, metallic, audible even over her own engines. It was the sound of rifle fire, picked up by Mace's open mic. "Reaper 1-1, Mace 6, Kincaid's voice snapped, the professional calm thinner this time. "We have multiple sniper positions, vicinity grid 428991. They've got us pinned. Also taking intermittent mortar fire, unknown origin." Eva's fingers danced across the control stick, lining up her TGP crosshairs. "Copy, Mace. I have eyes on 3 suspected sniper positions in the rock formation at 991. Stand by for 9 line." She rattled off the attack brief, her voice a flat monotone. "Type of attack, target coordinates, elevation, ordnance. Recommend GBU 38 on grid 991 to service all 3. Advise when ready for remarks." The GBU 38, a 500-pound GPS-guided bomb, was the perfect tool. It was precise, lethal, and would collapse the fortified positions with one strike. It was surgical. The radio was silent for a full 10 seconds. "Negative, Reaper." Kincaid's voice was clipped. "Negative on the 500-pounder. That is too close. The fragmentation radius is too high." Eva's gaze remained locked on the screen. Her system calculated the fragmentation radius. It was well outside the danger close threshold. He wasn't worried about fragmentation. He was worried about her. He was worried about overkill. "Mace," she transmitted, her voice still level. "CDE, collateral damage estimate, is low. Friendly position is 320 meters clear. The GBU 38 is the appropriate munition." I said negative. The static crackled with his impatience. "I don't need you collapsing the whole damn mountain, Captain. I need you to suppress those snipers so we can move. I want guns only, 30 millimeter. Can you give me that?" Eva's jaw tightened. Guns only. She stared at the target. Granite fortifications, dug-in fighters, the 30 millimeter PGU-14 armor-piercing incendiary rounds were devastating, but against fortified rock, they were just very fast, very loud pebbles. They would spark, ricochet, and piss off the enemy. They would not neutralize the threat. It was the wrong tool for the job. It was a tactic born of distrust. She felt the old, cold burn of cinder in her stomach, the endless questions from the review board. "Captain, why the 2,000-pounder? Was a smaller munition not available?" Now the man she was trying to save was forcing her to be ineffective, because he trusted the legend of her failure more than the fact of her expertise. This was the job. This was the quiet fortitude. She would not argue. She would not debate tactics over an open net while men were taking fire. She would obey. And when his plan failed, she would be ready with hers. "May 6, copy guns only," she said. The words felt like gravel in her mouth. "Rolling in for a west to east strafing run. Advise when clear." Mace is clear. Clear hot. Eva banked the heavy A-10. The G-forces pressed her into the seat. She toggled the master arm switch to arm and selected the GAU-8 Avenger. The HUD symbology shifted, the gunsight pipper appearing in the glass. She lined up the run. The ground rushed up to meet her, the gray boulders growing larger. She saw the muzzle flash from one of the sniper holes, a tiny spark of light. Her thumb depressed the trigger. The world dissolved in a sound that was not a sound, but a physical violation. The brrrt of the 7-barrel cannon vibrated through her bones, a noise so loud it felt like the cockpit was being torn apart. The air filled with the smell of cordite and ozone, a sharp, metallic tang that always reminded her of lightning. A stream of tracers, white-hot, reached out from her nose and smashed into the granite. Sparks and dust erupted. She pulled off the target, climbing hard, the automated voice in her headset screaming, "Altitude! Altitude!" She leveled out, her breathing steady, and watched her TGP feed. The dust cleared. The shooting from the ground had stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a single muzzle flash, followed by another. The radio crackled. "No effect, Reaper. I say again, no effect. They're dug in too deep. You just woke them up." Eva's gloved hand rested on the store's management panel, her index finger hovering over the button for the GBU-38. She waited. "Reaper," Kincaid's voice came back, strained. "What else you got? You said you had 500-pounders?" He was still avoiding the logical solution. He was still dictating the terms. He was walking his men into a grave, one bad decision at a time. "Affirmative, Mace. I have GBU-38s. Okay, but not on the rocks. I have a suspected mortar position. Grid 427995. It's further out. Drop one there, but stay clear of my position." She found the new grid. It was an empty patch of desert. He was wasting her fuel. He was testing her. "Copy," Eva said, her voice a flat line of perfect, lethal patience. "Standing by for the 9 line." Eva Rostova's cockpit was a bubble of cold, focused calm. Below her, the Sarakul Valley remained a lethal checkerboard. Kincaid wanted a 500-pound bomb wasted on a phantom. He would get it. May 6, Reaper 1-1, copy 9 line. Target 427995, GBU-38, Radback correct. Correct, you are clear hot. She banked the A-10 into a wide, high orbit. This wasn't a roll-in attack. This was a GPS drop, impersonal, clinical. The aircraft just needed to be inside a launch acceptability region, a wide cone in the sky. It was the tactical equivalent of throwing a dart from a moving car. Her fingers programmed the coordinates Kincaid had provided. The TGP, still slaved to the real threat, the sniper rocks, showed the 3 heat signatures, motionless, waiting. They knew she couldn't touch them. "Mace, target coordinates are loaded. 1 minute to release." Her left hand moved to the store's management panel. She selected the GBU-38 on the outboard pylon. A green RDY, ready light illuminated. On her HUD, a small diamond appeared, representing the target grid. It was, as she'd noted, an empty patch of gravel wash, half a kilometer from the pin-down ODA. She maneuvered the hog, placing the flight path vector over the target diamond. The in-range cue flashed. 30 seconds. The frustration was a cold, tight knot in her stomach. This bomb was a gesture, a performance of obedience. It was a 500-pound, high-explosive message from Kincaid, telling her he was in charge. Meanwhile, his men kept their heads down, pinned by a threat he refused to let her solve efficiently. Her cinder review board flashed in her mind. "Captain, your BDA shows total destruction. Was this level of force truly proportional to the threat?" Now she was on the opposite end of the spectrum, using force that was intentionally disproportionately small, simply to appease the psyche of the man on the ground. The absurdity of it was galling. 10 seconds. The aircraft flew itself, locked on the path. Her job was to wait for the tone, press the button, and watch a perfectly good munition dig a hole in the empty desert. A steady chime. Release. Release. Her thumb depressed the pickle button. A heavy clunk vibrated through the airframe as the bomb separated from the pylon. The aircraft, 500 pounds lighter on its starboard wing, twitched, and the autopilot immediately compensated. "Bomb away, Mace. Splash in 030. She didn't bank away. She didn't need to. She simply continued her orbit, her TGP slewed back to the sniper rocks. She watched the real targets while the wrong bomb fell. The 30-second count ticked down on her HUD. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. On the TGP, pointed miles away from the impact, the screen flashed white from the reflected detonation. A second later, the sound reached Kincaid's radio, a distant, muffled crump. "Solid hit, Reaper. Good splash." Kincaid's voice was, for the first time, almost cheerful. He had gotten his way. He had made the bomber drop a bomb where he wanted. Eva kept her TGP locked on the sniper rocks. One of the heat signatures moved. A man crawling from one boulder to another, repositioning. Ping, ping. Ping! The sound from Kincaid's mic was sharp. The cheerfulness in his voice vanished. Shit. Shit. They're still. Reaper, they're still dug in. The snipers are still engaging. No effect on the primary threat. Eva took a slow, steady breath, the rubber of her oxygen mask cool against her skin. She let the silence stretch, let him sit in the failure of his own plan. "Copy, Mace," she finally transmitted, her voice devoid of triumph. "The GBU-38 impacted the coordinates you provided. The sniper position at 428-991 was not the designated target." A long, heavy sigh hissed over the radio. Defeat. "Okay, Reaper, okay, your way. I need you to hit those rocks now. The 991 grid." She waited. "Confirm ordnance." Another pause. She could almost hear him grinding his teeth. He was cornered. But his pride, his fear of her, was still stronger than his tactical sense. Use another 500-pounder. GBU-38, just like the last one. But put it on the rocks this time. Can you do that? Keep it precise." He still wouldn't authorize the 2,000-pounder, the GBU-31, which would collapse the entire formation. He was still forcing her to use a scalpel when she needed a sledgehammer. He was asking her to kill one sniper, not the nest. "May 6, copy. Another GBU-38 on grid 428-991, standing by for your 9 line." She toggled her stores panel, selecting the next 500-pound bomb. One more wasted gesture, but this one, at least, was pointed in the right direction. "May 6, read back correct. Rolling in for GBU-38 strike on the sniper position." Eva's hands were steady as she reset the coordinates, this time on the granite rocks. A 500-pounder was still an inefficient solution, but it was a solution. It would kill one, maybe two, of the snipers. It was a marginal gain, but it was all Kincaid would allow. She programmed the bomb, her movements, economical. She slewed the TGP back onto the rocks, her crosshairs settling on the most prominent heat signature. The system was ready. She commenced the wide, high orbit for the GPS-guided release. "Mace, 30 seconds to release." "Copy, Reaper. Clear hot." As the timer ticked down, Eva kept her eyes glued to the TGP screen, scanning the periphery of the target. Her discipline demanded it. Never just watch the target. Watch what's around it. 20 seconds. A flicker of movement. Not at the rocks. Further east. A dark shape, a shadow detaching itself from a low, scrub-covered ridge she had previously dismissed as terrain. Her fingers flew across the TGP controls, slewing the camera, jamming the zoom. It wasn't a shadow. It was a man. Then another, and another. They were pouring from a black void in the hillside. A cave mouth, a tunnel, perfectly concealed. 10, 20, 30 men spreading out in a trained skirmish line, weapons glinting in the infrared. They were not snipers. They were an assault force. And they were moving fast, down the wash, directly toward Mace. "Mace! Mace 6!" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the procedure. "New threat. I have a company-sized element, grid 429-994, emerging from a tunnel. They are massing for an assault." The blood drained from her face. The Cinder mission. It flashed behind her eyes, hot and sharp. The command vehicle. The perfect coordinates. The GBU-31 falling. And then, at the last second, the other vehicles emerging from a hidden alley. The ones that weren't in the intel. The ones that drove right into the blast radius. This is how it started. "Reaper, Kincaid's voice was cut off by a new sound. A sudden, high-pitched whoosh that pierced the radio static. Eva saw it on the TGP, a streak of white heat arcing from the new assault force. An RPG. It was aimed at Mace's position. "RPG! RPG! Mace, get—" The rocket struck. The infrared screen bloomed white, a blinding, instantaneous flower of heat, centered directly on the ODA's position. The heat signature of their GMV, their primary vehicle, flared and then vanished in the glare. "Man down! Kilo is hit! Kilo is hit!" The radio exploded, a chorus of screams layered over Kincaid's frantic roar. "We are mobility killed! We are fixed! They're... God! Reaper, they're everywhere!" The timer on her HUD was still ticking. Release 5-4. Eva's hand slammed the control panel, aborting the strike on the sniper rocks. The GBU-38 stayed on its pylon. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The cinder memory was a physical weight, threatening to paralyze her. Hesitation, delay, review. She forced the memory down, crushing it with procedure. Compartmentalize. Fly the plane. Her hands, slick with sweat inside the leather gloves, were already moving. She slewed the TGP from the snipers to the new assault force. The RPG team, 3 men, were reloading, standing exposed in the open. "Mace, I am aborting the sniper strike, engaging the RPG team at 994 now." She didn't wait for his clearance. The ROE for self-defense and defense of friendlies was clear. This was no longer a standoff. It was an ambush. She redesignated the target. The 500-pounder was still the selected weapon. It was too small for the whole force, but it was perfect for the RPG team. Bomb away. The clunk of the separation felt distant. She watched the bomb fall, a tiny black pixel against the infrared gray. It struck the 3-man team dead center. The screen flashed white again, smaller this time, but just as final. "Good hit, Reaper. RPG team is gone," Kincaid yelled, his breathing ragged. "But it's not. It's not enough. They're still coming. They're using the rocks for cover. The snipers they're coordinating. They're pinning us for the assault." Eva stared at the screen. The 500-pound bomb was a drop in the ocean. The main force had split, advancing along 2 flanks, using the very terrain Kincaid had forbidden her to strike effectively. She had 1 GBU-38 left, and the 2 2,000-pound GBU-31s, the overkill bombs. "Mace," she said, her voice a cold, hard instrument. "The 500-pounders are insufficient to stop this assault. I am recommending the GBU-31 on the tunnel." The battlefield below had fractured. What had been a simple pin-down was now a full, coordinated assault. Eva Rostova's TGP display showed the grim reality. The ODA, now vehicle-less, was decisively engaged from 3 sides. The snipers on the rocks pinned them, while the 2 arms of the assault force advanced. It was a classic L ambush, and Mace was in the kill zone. Her remaining 500-pound bomb was useless. It was a bandage on an amputation. Her 30mm cannon was equally futile against an enemy force of this size, now spread among the rocks. She would run out of fuel long before she ran out of targets. There was only one target that mattered: the source. The black, pixelated mouth of the tunnel. Eva's hand hovered over the store's management panel, over the 2 green RDY lights for the GBU-31s. The weapons Colonel Jensen had forbidden. The weapons Kincaid feared. the same class of munition that had branded her. She took a steadying breath. The air in her mask tasted of plastic and stale adrenaline. Her quiet fortitude was her logic. She would not let one man's pride or her own past trauma dictate the outcome. The tactical situation demanded a definitive solution. May 6, she transmitted, her voice a flat, clinical blade. The 38s are insufficient. I identify the enemy center of gravity as the tunnel entrance at grid 994. I recommend the GBU-31 to collapse the entrance. It is the only way to stop the flow of reinforcements. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. GBU-31. She had said it. She had offered the one solution everyone was afraid of. The radio silence that followed was heavier than the bomb itself. It stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. On the TGP, she watched the assault force gain another 50 meters. She could hear the thump, thump, thump of Mace's .50 caliber firing in long, desperate bursts. Reaper, Did you say... Negative. Kincaid's voice was ragged, choked with disbelief and anger. Negative, Reaper. That is not an option. May 6, that tunnel is the enemy's artery. If we do not sever it, they will bleed you dry. My 500-pounder will not achieve penetration. The 2,000-pounder will. It is the correct tactical choice. The CDE on that thing. You'll bring the whole damn mountain down on us. It's too big, Reaper. It's what Jensen warned me about. It's overkill. Find another way. Eva's gloved fist clenched. He had said it. Overkill. He threw the word at her like a weapon, even as his men were dying. Mace, the collateral damage estimate for the tunnel is low. The risk to your position is acceptable. The risk of inaction is catastrophic. They are sacrificing fighters to pin you. This is a prepared assault. They will not stop. Her logic was a steel wall. She was right. The calculations were correct. The trajectory was clear. The bomb would strike the hillside, and the blast wave would be channeled into the tunnel, not back towards the ODA. Find another way, Kincaid snarled. That is a direct order, Captain. You are not cleared for the 31. Use your last 500-pounder on the Eastern Assault Team. Do it now. It was a final, pointless order. He was ordering her to fire a single bullet at a charging bear. She felt the cold rage of the Cinder debrief. The circular, impossible questions. The judgment from men who weren't there. Now it was happening again, in real time. She was being ordered into failure by the very man she was tasked to protect. Her integrity warred with her duty. She could not refuse a direct order from the ground commander, but she knew it was the wrong one. Copy, Mace, she said, the words like ash in her mouth. Engaging Eastern element with 1 GBU-38, stand by. She selected her last 500-pound bomb. She knew with chilling certainty that it would not be enough. She was being forced to prove her own ineffectiveness, one bomb at a time. As she banked the A-10 to line up the pointless attack, a new voice cut across the channel, this one calm, digital, and terrifyingly neutral. All stations, this is Magic. Be advised, I am tracking a significant weather event moving into the Saracol Valley. Estimate 0 visibility conditions in 15 mics. Eva's head snapped up from the TGP. She looked west. The horizon was gone. It had been replaced by a solid, churning wall of brown, a roiling mass of sand and dust rising thousands of feet into the air. A haboob. Kincaid's panicked voice crackled. Magic! Say again, time to impact? 15 mics, maybe less. Godspeed. Eva stared at the advancing storm, minutes. She had 15 minutes to fight a war, blinded by a prideful ground commander, before the sky itself shut her out completely. The wall of sand advanced with an unnatural, terrifying speed. It was not weather, it was an erasure. A solid brown tsunami that rose from the desert floor to blot out the sun. 15 mics was a cruel joke. It was 5. Reaper 1-1, May 6, drop that bomb, drop it now! Kincaid's voice was frantic, the desperation raw. The advancing storm was a death sentence, and he knew it. Eva ignored the TGP. She had no time for a precision GPS drop. This was a combat lacing run. She switched to her night vision goggles, the world shifting to a grainy, monochromatic green. She rolled the A-10 onto its wing, pointing the nose of the aircraft directly at the Eastern Assault Force. The pipper on her HUD was over the green-black cluster of fighters. Mace, I am visual. Rolling in hot, guns and bombs, same pass. She was breaking procedure, dropping a bomb and firing the cannon simultaneously on a danger-close target. It was reckless. It was also their only chance. Clear hot! Clear hot! The ground rushed up. The wind shear from the approaching storm wall slammed her aircraft, forcing the nose down. She fought the stick, her muscles straining. Altitude! Altitude! The automated warning was a shrill scream in her ears. She saw the muzzle flashes from the ground. Bright green blossoms aimed at her. Her thumb hit the pickle button. The last GBU-38 fell away. In the same breath, her index finger squeezed the trigger. The brrrr-t of the GAU-8 tore the air apart, a final defiant roar against the approaching silence. She watched her green tracers walk directly through the enemy line, just as the 500-pounder impacted. The combined explosion was immense. The ground below her vanished in a flash of bright green-white. She pulled the stick into her lap, the G-forces crushing her into the seat, hauling the heavy jet skyward. She climbed, breaking right, just as the first tendrils of the storm engulfed the valley floor. Her TGP screen, still pointed at the impact zone, dissolved into a uniform, swirling gray. It was useless. Snow. Static. She ripped the NVGs from her helmet, blinking in the sudden darkness of her cockpit. The world outside her canopy was gone. It was not black. It was a smothering, suffocating brown. The sun was a pale, forgotten rumor. The wind hit the A-10 like a giant's fist. The airframe groaned in protest, bucking and shuddering. A high-pitched scream filled her ears as the sand, traveling at over 60 knots, scoured the armored glass of her canopy. It sounded like she was flying through gravel. She was blind. Her primary advantage, her eyes, her multi-million-dollar targeting pod, was gone. She was now just a pilot in a metal box, 15,000 feet above a fight she could no longer see. Mace 6, this is Reaper. I am blind. I have lost all visual. I say again, I am sensor blind. How copy? The radio hissed, the static thick and overwhelming, peppered by the high-pitched z of the sand hitting the fuselage. Reaper? Kincaid's voice was barely audible, a ghost in the machine. Copy. Blind. Can't see. The static roared, swallowing his words. Eva's hands gripped the controls. The cockpit, once a window to the world, felt like a coffin. She was useless. A $40 million paperweight orbiting in a sea of dust, listening to men die. Her flight computer, running on inertial navigation and GPS, kept her in a perfect, steady orbit. She was a silent, blind angel, circling a hell she could only hear. The static cleared for a moment. No, we're blind. They're moving. They're thump, thump, thump. Oh God, they're moving. The sound of Mace's .50 caliber was unmistakable. The enemy was exploiting the storm. They were using the cover of the wind and sand to advance, to finish the job. Eva stared at the gray, useless screen of her TGP. She had 1,000 rounds of 30mm left. She had 2 GBU-31s, and she had no way to aim them. Her quiet fortitude snapped, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. She was no longer a protector. She was a witness. The static was a living thing. It clawed at her ears, a constant howling shriek of sand and wind. Through it, the battle for May 6 was a series of broken, desperate vignettes. "At the south wall! South wall! Reaper, hit them!" Kincaid's voice, shredded by the interference. "Mace, I have no visual!" Eva's voice was a strained monotone, fighting to keep the panic from her own throat. She was flying on instruments, a ghost in the storm, her hands clenched on the controls. "I cannot see the wall. I cannot aim. Just shoot! Point your nose south and shoot! Give us a gun run!" His request was insane. A blind strafing run, danger close, into a zero-visibility storm. She'd be just as likely to hit him as the enemy. The GAU-8 was a precision weapon, but it required a pilot's eye. "Negative, Mace. I cannot visually acquire the target. A gun run is impossible. It will be ineffective and risks fratricide. You must give me coordinates." "We don't have coordinates. We have thump, thump, thump. Contact, contact, 10 meters, west." Gunfire erupted, so loud it distorted her headset. Eva's stomach twisted. She stared at her weapons panel. 1,000 rounds of 30mm, useless, and the 2 GBU-31s, their green RDY lights glowing like malevolent eyes. The 31s were JDAMs, Joint Direct Attack munitions. They didn't need her eyes. They only needed GPS coordinates. They were fire and forget. All weather. They were the only weapons she had left that could function in this storm. The Cinder mission clawed at her memory. The coordinates had been verified, triple-checked, and they had been wrong. An old woman and 2 children had been in the blast radius, hidden by an alley. She had dropped on coordinates, and it had ruined her. Now she was blind. Kincaid was blind. He was asking her to trust his panicked guess in a sandstorm with a 2,000-pound bomb. "Mace," she transmitted, her voice cold, procedural. She had to force him to the logical conclusion. "My guns are unusable. My 500-pounders are expended. My only remaining all-weather munitions are the GBU-31s." Silence. The static howled, and beneath it, she heard Kincaid breathing, a ragged, desperate sound. He was processing her words. He was realizing that the only thing that could save him was the one thing he had forbidden. "No," he whispered, the word almost lost. "No, not that. It's too... Reaper, it'll vaporize us." "Mace, the alternative is that they will overrun you. The 31 is a GPS weapon. If you can give me your precise coordinates, I can calculate an offset. I can drop on the assault force. But I must have coordinates. I can't. The GPS is... Wait." More gunfire. A scream. They're everywhere. They're... Reaper, they're inside the wire." The words hit her like a physical blow. Inside the wire. The mission was over. This was no longer defense. It was survival. Kincaid's voice changed. The panic was gone, replaced by a sudden, terrifying, grim acceptance. "Reaper! Reaper 1-1, this is May 6. He was formal, procedural. He was giving a last command. "Reaper, stand by for a new 9-line. Eva's hand, slick with sweat, moved to her notepad. "Standing by, Mace. Line 1, GBU-31, line 2, grid 428990. I say again, 428990. Eva's blood ran cold. She stared at her moving map. She knew that grid. She had stared at it for hours. "Mace," she whispered, her procedural mask cracking. "Mace, that is your grid. That is the bunker position." The radio crackled. She heard the click of Kincaid lighting a flare, its useless hiss audible even over the storm. Then his voice, a terrible, final calm. "Affirmative, Reaper. Target is my position. They are on us. We are being overrun. You were right about the tunnel. It's too late. I need you to drop that GBU-31 on me. It's the only way. This is a broken arrow." The cockpit air was too thin, too cold. Hypoxia's fuzzy edges crept into her vision, a symptom of the shallow, shocked breaths she was taking. Eva Rostova stared at the glowing green coordinates on her HUD. 428-990, the bunker. Kincaid's voice, stripped of all authority, all pride, was just the raw sound of a man at his end. "This is a broken arrow, Reaper. I say again, broken arrow." The world narrowed to that single, terrible request. The weapon he refused. The solution he mocked. Now the only solution. The irony was a physical sickness, a coppery taste in her mouth. The storm howled, a deafening, abrasive shriek against the canopy, and beneath it, the radio exploded. "Reaper 1-1, May 6, they're inside the wire! They are inside the wire! I say again, we are being overrun." The narrative had caught up. This was the moment. The screams she had heard in the cold open were not a memory, but the present. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of heavy machine gun fire, punctuated by the sharp, panicked cracks of Mace's rifles, filled her headset. They were fighting hand to hand in the dust. Her professionalism, her quiet fortitude, was a steel shell around the core of her horror. She fell back on the only thing that made sense: procedure. "Mace, copy overrun," she said. Her own voice was shockingly calm, a detached instrument. "I need you to confirm danger close. The 31 is a 2,000-pound solution. I cannot drop it unless you confirm." This was the script. The final, awful catechism of close air support. He had to say the words. He had to accept the risk. "We don't have time for confirmation. They're gah!" A scream. A wet, choked sound. More gunfire, deafeningly close to the mic. "They're 10 meters from the bunker. We are dead. Just drop it. Drop it!" Eva's gaze fixed on the target coordinates glowing on her digital map. The bunker, the friendlies, the red circle of the calculated fragmentation radius overlapped them entirely. This wasn't support. This was annihilation. This was a pilot's nightmare. "Mace," she transmitted, her voice cutting through his panic. Her left hand was already moving to the store's management panel, her finger hovering over the switch for the port-side GBU-31. "Confirm. Are you ordering me to fire on your position?" A beat of static. The thump, thump, thump paused. Then a single desperate word, a last breath of command. "Yes." The word echoed in the sudden silence. Yes. The Cinder mission was a ghost. This was real. The restriction from Colonel Jensen, for strategic targets only, was meaningless. The ROE was meaningless. The only rule that mattered now was broken arrow. The ground commander, his authority absolute in his final moments, had given a lawful, final order. Her thumb hovered over the red pickle button on the joystick, the plastic worn smooth by years of practice, but never for this. One press. A solution that would save them by obliterating them. Her breath hitched. She had to override her own Cinder trauma. She had to override Kincaid's skepticism. She had to believe in the physics of the weapon, that the bunker dug into the rock might survive the overpressure, that the bomb detonating on the surface would annihilate the attackers outside the walls. It was a terrible, desperate gamble. She keyed her mic, not to Kincaid, but to the AWACS. Magic, this is Reaper 1-1, declaring broken arrow. Stand by for 9 line. Target is friendly position. Grid 428-990. Ordnance is GBU 31. She was no longer asking for permission. She was informing them of an action. The decision was made. The yes from Kincaid was a release, a key turning in a lock. The tactical problem was solved. The moral and professional problem was just beginning. Eva Rostova's fingers flew, inputting the coordinates 428-990 into her targeting computer. The system accepted them. On her HUD, the small diamond representing the target locked onto the precise location where Mace 6 was fighting for his life. The A-10, still in its blind orbit, automatically calculated the release point. Before she could bank the aircraft, a new voice cut through her headset. It was not the panicked scream of the ground. It was the calm, digital, infuriatingly detached voice of the AWACS controller. Reaper 1-1, this is Magic. Be advised, I copy your broken arrow transmission. A pause. The controller was checking his rules. Reaper, CDE for that munition in proximity to friendlies is level 1. Requires general officer approval. You are not authorized for this drop. I say again, you are not authorized. The words were a spike of ice. Not authorized. Colonel Jensen's face flashed in her mind. They are overkill, Reaper. The Cinder Review Board. Captain, were you aware you were violating CDE protocol? Kilo is down. Kilo is down. A new voice screamed from Mace's radio. Oh God, they're in the bunker. The roar of the ground versus the whisper of the bureaucracy. Her career versus their lives. Eva stared at the swirling, impenetrable brown sand on her canopy. She was being told to fly in circles, following the rules, while the men she was sworn to protect were torn apart. The overkill label, the skepticism, Kincaid's distrust, it had all led to this. A perfect storm of procedure and pride, and the cost was Mace. Her quiet fortitude was not about enduring insults. It was about enduring the consequence of a correct, impossible decision. She keyed her mic, cutting off the AWACS controller mid-sentence. Magic, stand by. Her voice was pure ice. Her left hand moved to the small keypad below her HUD. She entered the 7-digit code. Her pilot in command, emergency authorization. The break glass option. It was an override that staked her entire career, her commission, and her freedom on the single, terrible fact that she was right. It was an admission that she was willfully violating a direct ROE. The system chimed. Code accepted. Magic, she transmitted, her voice cutting through the storm. This is Reaper 1-1. I am invoking pilot in command discretion. The ROE is superseded by the immediate threat to friendly life. I am engaging. Transmitting override code. Now. She didn't wait for his reply. She cut the channel to AWACS, leaving only the tactical frequency open. There was no more debate. There was no more committee. There was only her, the bomb, and the men below. She banked the A-10 hard, the G-force pressing her into the seat, the heavy jet groaning as it turned toward the release point. Mace 6, she called, her voice resonating with a final, terrible authority. This is Reaper. I am in from the north. Coordinates locked. Get your heads down. A broken transmission. Copy, Reaper, God, give 'em. The rest was lost to gunfire. The HUD symbology shifted. The flight director bar centered. The aircraft was on path. The storm shrieked, but the jet was stable, a GPS-guided arrow. A new tone chimed in her ear, the release cue. 10 seconds to release. She stared, unblinking at the countdown timer. 9, 8, 7. This was it. The act that would define her. Not Cinder. This, the moment she chose to become overkill to save them. 6, 5, 4. Her breath was still. Her heart was a cold stone. 3, 2. The timer reached 1. The automated release cue chimed, a steady, permissive tone. Now. The final transmissions from the ground dissolved into a wall of white noise and overlapping screams. It was no longer communication. It was the sound of an ending. Eva Rostova's thumb, steady, rational, and completely detached from the tremor in her gut, depressed the red button on the joystick. Pickle, pickle, pickle. Her voice was a monotone, a simple statement of fact, broadcast to no one and everyone, a single word to mark the end of one world and the beginning of another. A heavy, violent clunk resonated through the airframe, a sound more felt than heard. It was the sound of 2,000 pounds of steel and high explosive separating from the pylon. The A-10 instantly lightened on its port side, lurched upwards, a sudden buoyant lift that made her stomach drop. The bomb was gone. It was falling. Tumbling through the shrieking, opaque brown sand, guided only by the mathematics of its own internal systems and the ghosts of satellites orbiting far above the storm. Eva did not breathe. She did not think. The cinder memory, the AWACS controller, Kincaid's face, it all evaporated. There was only the act, suspended in time. The plane felt light. She felt light, empty. The bomb fell for 3 seconds. 10. 20. Her hands, acting on pure, ingrained training, were already moving. She slammed the throttles to their forward stops, the engines whining to a desperate maximum roar. She jammed the control stick hard to the right, pulling the A-10 into a gut-churning, high-G climbing turn. She had to get away. The ROE was clear. Even in a broken arrow, the delivery aircraft must attempt to escape the fragmentation and blast radius of its own ordnance. The G-forces pressed her deep into the ejection seat, the straps cutting into her shoulders. Her G-suit inflated, squeezing her legs and abdomen, a tight mechanical embrace to keep the blood in her head. The aircraft shuddered, fighting the thick, turbulent air of the storm. On her HUD, the small green timer, which had started its countdown from the moment of release, ticked down. Impact. In 15. She wrestled the hog around, its nose pointed away from the target coordinates. 10. She could still hear the gunfire on the tactical net. A single, ragged burst from a rifle, then silence. 9. 8. She was flying away from them. She had dropped her weapon and fled. The thought was a sharp, cold sliver of ice in her mind. 7. She stared at the blank brown canopy, her eyes fixed on the timer on the glass HUD. 6. 5. Mace, she whispered, her mic live. Heads down. 4. The static was the only reply. 3, 2, 1. The timer hit 0. For an instant, nothing. Just the howl of the sandstorm and the roar of her engines. Then, the world flashed. The storm, the impenetrable, suffocating brown, lit up from within. A blinding, impossible white-yellow glare pulsed through the cockpit, so bright it burned through Eva's closed eyelids. It was not a light. It was an X-ray, imprinting the image of her own hands, ghostly bones inside her gloves, onto her retinas. Simultaneously, the shock wave hit. It struck the A-10 like a solid object. The 40,000-pound jet was thrown sideways, a violent, bone-jarring slam that rattled her teeth and sent her helmet cracking against the canopy glass. Red caution lights flared across her dashboard. Master caution, master caution. The ground, 15,000 feet below, had shaken her from the sky, but the sound was the worst. The tactical radio, which seconds before had been a chorus of gunfire and screams, exploded. It was not static. It was a single, deafening, electronic shh. The shriek of a dying atmosphere. The electromagnetic pulse of the detonation wiping the frequency clean. Then silence. Not quiet. Not the absence of noise, but a void. A deep, abyssal silence that was heavier and more terrifying than any scream. Eva wrestled the plane back to level, her heart hammering a sick, triple-time rhythm against her ribs. The caution lights cleared. The aircraft was stable. The radio was dead. The shriek had subsided, replaced by a low, empty hiss. The sound of an open channel, connected to nothing. "Mace," she said, her voice sounding small, alien in her own ears. "Mace 6, this is Reaper, report." Only the hiss replied. She checked her comms panel. The frequencies were correct. The equipment was online. There was simply no one transmitting. She had done it. She had vaporized them. "Mace 6, radio check." Her voice was tighter now, the procedural calm cracking, revealing the raw panic beneath. "Mace 2, any Mace station, radio check." The hiss, the endless, empty hiss. She stared at the comms panel, at the small green light indicating her radio was active, willing it to flicker, willing a voice, a cough, a single word to cut through the void. Nothing. She had evaporated them. She had taken Kincaid's desperate yes and turned it into an obituary. The overkill name wasn't a joke. It was a prophecy. She was a butcher. The Cinder incident was a footnote. This was a war crime. Her ROE override, her pilot's discretion. She had used it to murder her own team. She continued to circle, trapped in the swirling brown sand, her instruments telling her she was perfectly safe. The GPS showed her orbit, a neat digital circle around the 428,990 grid, a digital tombstone. The silence in her headset was an accusation. It was the sound of the void she had created. The shockwave had been the ground shaking. The flash had been the end of their world. She had done exactly what Kincidin had asked, and it had killed him. "Magic," she transmitted, her voice hollow, switching frequencies. "Reaper 1-1, splash, complete." The AWACS controller's voice came back instantly, clear, unaffected by the blast. "Copy, Reaper. What is your BDA? What is the status of Mace?" Eva looked at the gray, static-filled screen of her TGP. She looked at the silent comms panel. "Magic. BDA is unknown," she said. The words tasted like ash. I have lost all communication with Mace." Time dissolved. There was only the orbit, the high-pitched scour of the sand, and the suffocating, absolute hiss in her headset. Eva Rostova flew a perfect, automated circle around a grave she had dug from 15,000 feet. Each turn was a fresh layer of dirt on their coffin. She stared at her TGP, willing the gray static to clear, but the storm was relentless. The wind still buffeted the A-10, a constant, turbulent reminder of the chaos below. "Reaper 1-1 Magic! I need a BDA! What is the status of Mace?" The AWACS controller's voice was a needle, puncturing her sterile bubble of guilt. He needed a report, an after-action, data for his log. "Magic," she replied, her voice hollow, dead. "BDA is unknown. The storm is zero visibility. Comms are negative. I have no contact." "Reaper, understand you have no comms. Can you descend? Attempt a visual pass." Descend. Into the storm, into the blast radius, into the airborne dust and debris of a 2,000-pound bomb. It was a suicidal, pointless request. "Negative, Magic. The dust it's too thick. A visual pass is impossible. I have no way to assess." "Copy, Reaper. Stand by." She was alone again. The controller, having failed to get his data, retreated to his own clean, safe orbit, leaving her to circle the scene of her crime. She shut her eyes for 1 second. Just one. The image was seared onto her brain. The glowing green coordinates, 428-990. Kincaid's voice. Yes. She had done exactly what he asked. She had followed his final, desperate, lawful order. And it had killed him. It had killed them all. The Cinder incident, the clinic, the review board. It was all a prelude. This was the true act. The overkill name, spoken with such contempt by Kincaid. He had been right. He had seen the butcher in her before she had seen it herself. His final act was to invite her in. A new light flashed on her console. Not a master caution. This one was amber, steady, fuel low. She stared at it. The digital readout confirmed it. 7,000 pounds remaining, enough to get back to Fob Guardian. Not enough to circle. Not enough to wait for the storm to clear. Not enough to atone. The machine was telling her it was time to leave. This was the final, banal cruelty. She couldn't even stay and mourn. She had to run, leaving the BDA unknown, leaving their bodies unconfirmed in the dust. She would land at Guardian. The portside pylon would be empty. Colonel Jensen would be waiting. The questions would begin. And she would have no answers. Only the fact of the override code and the terrible, echoing silence from Mace. Her quiet fortitude. It wasn't strength. It was just this. The endurance of self-hatred. The ability to keep breathing, to keep flying the aircraft, while her soul screamed. She had failed. She had sacrificed her career for nothing. She had traded her commission for a crater full of friends. She leveled the A-10’s wings, breaking the orbit. She pointed the nose east, toward home. She keyed the mic, her voice thick, almost a whisper. Magic, Reaper 1-1 is bingo fuel. I am RTB. Copy, Reaper, cleared RTB. We'll have a CSAR team on standby for Mace soon as this storm breaks. CSAR, combat search and rescue, a recovery, not a rescue. They would be looking for bodies. For her. She flew in silence for 10 minutes, the sandstorm hissing its long goodbye. Then, a new sound. A single click on the tactical frequency. Her head snapped up. Click, crackle. It wasn't the hiss. It was something in the hiss. Mace? She whispered, her hand freezing on the throttle. Mace 6, radio check. A long, agonizing burst of static. Then, through it, a noise. A sound so broken, so impossible, it couldn't be real. The sound of a man coughing. The cough was a human sound in a digital void. It was rough, wet, and utterly real. Eva Rostova's hand froze on the throttle. The fuel low light, the RTB, the court-martial, it all evaporated. There was only that sound. She banked the A-10, an instinctive, desperate turn, hauling the nose of the aircraft back toward the coordinates, back toward the grave she was fleeing. She wasn't leaving, not yet. Mace! Mace 6, this is Reaper 1-1, I am reading you. Say again, what is your status? Her voice was too loud, too sharp. The procedural mask was gone. The radio hissed. The atmospheric distortion from the blast and the storm was still fighting her. But the signal was there, a thin thread in the static. Crackle pop. Reaper? It was a whisper. Mace, yes, I am here, talk to me. This is... The voice was choked, almost unrecognizable, layered with the sound of weeping or hyperventilating. This is Mace 2. We are... God. We... Mace 2. Ava's heart seized, not Kincaid. The relief that someone was alive was a dizzying, sickening wave. It crashed against the immediate, rock-solid certainty. Kincaid was dead. Mace 6, the JTAC, the man who had given the order, the man she had argued with, the man she had killed. He was gone. She had killed the ground commander. She was numb. The warring emotions, staggering relief and crushing guilt, neutralized each other, leaving a hollow, cold void. She was a killer and a savior, all in the same breath. "Mace 2, she said, her voice a strained, automated thing. She forced the procedure back. "What is your status? How many are you?" Three of us in the bunker." The voice, Mace 2, was gaining a fraction of strength, fueled by adrenaline and the miracle of her voice. "It's... God, Reaper, the air, everything's hot." "Mace 2, what is Kincaid's status? What is the status of Mace 6? She had to ask. She had to know. The logbook required it. Her soul required it. A long, terrible pause. The only sound was Mace 2 taking ragged, painful breaths. Kilo is gone. The blast. When they came in, Kincaid..." Mace 2 choked, a sob cutting him off. Eva closed her eyes. "He's dead. Kincaid is dead." She had done it. "Kincaid is..." A new sound, a different cough, a deeper, angrier sound from the same open mic. "I'm right here." The voice was a low, gravelly wreck, a sound that had been torn apart and put back together. "Damn it! I'm right here!" Eva's eyes snapped open. The cockpit, the storm, the fuel low light. It all rushed back into sharp, painful focus. It was not Mace 2. It was not a ghost. "Mace 6? She whispered, her voice trembling. "Kincaid? Is that you?" The radio hissed. And then the voice of the man she was sure she had just evaporated, weak, coughing, but undeniably alive. "Reaper, Kincaid, the bunker, it held. You, Jesus." He wasn't speaking to her. He was just, speaking. The ground, it shook. It was a pause, filled with a sound of pure, ragged awe. It was overkill. Overkill. He used the word. Kincaid. He was alive, and he used the word. It hung in Eva's headset, stripped of its malice, stripped of its judgment. It was no longer an insult or a reputation. It was a statement of fact. A description of the awesome, terrifying power she had unleashed. A power he had now experienced from the ground. Eva's hand, which had been gripping the control stick hard enough to make her knuckles white, slowly relaxed. She was still flying. The A-10 was still in its turn, heading back toward them. The fuel low light was still flashing, a steady amber pulse. "Kincaid," she said, her voice unsteady, the name a question. "What is your status? What is the BDA?" The radio crackled. It was Mace 2's voice that answered, still high-pitched, still shaking. "Reaper, the bunker held. The overhead, it's gone. But the walls held. Kilo didn't make it. He was at the door." A pause. She heard him taking deep, shuddering breaths. "We looked outside. What we can see, God, there's nothing. The rocks, the sniper positions, they're gone, just gone. The whole ridge is black. And the tunnel is collapsed. It's just a crater. Everything outside is just a crater." He was describing the visual from the user's summary. The ground shaking. The redefinition of destruction. The true, terrifying scale of the weapon, seen from the inside. Eva listened, her eyes closed. The 2,000-pound solution. It had worked. The bunker, built into the granite, had been shielded from the worst of the blast, which had channeled its force up and out, annihilating the exposed assault force. Her calculation, her desperate, logic-based gamble, had been correct. Then, Kincaid's voice cut back in, stronger this time, raw and coughing. "Reaper, Kincaid. May 6, I'm here." The bunker held. You... Jesus. The ground shook. It was overkill. He said it again. And then, after a pause so long she thought the connection had died, he added 2 words. And it was a good hit. Eva's breath hitched, a sharp, painful intake. Good hit, Kincaid repeated, his voice thick with the dust and the shock and the awful dawning realization of his own survival. You saved us. You saved us. Good hit. The 2 phrases together, overkill, good hit. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for a year, the constant grinding weight of Operation Cinder, of the skepticism, of Jensen's warning and Kincaid's mistrust, it all uncoiled. It left her body in a single, shuddering exhale, a breath she felt like she had been holding since she'd first earned her call sign. Her validation wasn't a medal. It wasn't a parade. It would never be in a report. It was just this. One broken, half-static transmission from the man who had doubted her most. A simple, awestruck, good hit. The amber fuel low light flashed again, insistent. Reality. She had to leave. They were alive, but she had to leave. May 6, good copy, she transmitted, her voice, her real voice, returning. Good copy all. I'm glad you're... She stopped. Procedure. May 6, I am bingo fuel. I am critical. I must RTB. Copy, Reaper. Kincaid's voice was already distant. We'll see you on the ground. May 6, out. The channel went quiet. Not the dead, abyssal void of before. Just quiet. Eva Rostova leveled her wings one last time, her orbit complete. She looked at the empty pylon on her port wing. She turned the nose of the Hog east toward home. The flight back to Fob Guardian was a slow unwinding. Eva Rostova flew on instruments, the storm a brown, hissing memory behind her. The sky ahead was a deep, pre-dawn purple, bruised and cold. She did not contact AWACS. They did not contact her. There was nothing left to say. The A-10’s landing gear locked into place with a solid, definitive thunk. She brought the Hog down gently, the tires kissing the tarmac. The jet, light on fuel and ordnance, felt nimble, almost grateful. She taxied to the empty hardstand, the ground crews watching her under the harsh yellow floodlights. It was 0300. She shut down the engines. The twin turbines spooled down, their high-pitched whine descending into a low, metallic sigh. The silence of the night rushed in, heavy and absolute. It was a different silence than the one from the radio. This one was peaceful. She sat in the cockpit for a full minute, the green glow of the HUD the only light. The air smelled of hot metal, burnt fuel, and ozone. She unclicked her harness, the heavy buckles separating with a sharp snap. Her movements were slow, weighted. She climbed down the ladder, her boots hitting the concrete. Her helmet bag felt impossibly heavy in her hand. Sergeant Diaz, her crew chief, was waiting. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his eyes tracing the line of the port wing. He stared at the empty pylon, where the GBU-31 had been. He looked back at her. His expression was unreadable. "She's lighter, ma'am," he finally said, his voice low. "She is, Sergeant." He nodded once, then turned to begin his post-flight checks. Eva walked from the flight line. The cold desert air felt good on her sweat-soaked skin. She walked toward the debriefing huts, the path a familiar one, but it felt different tonight. Each step was a conscious effort. A figure stepped out of the shadows near the hangar door. Colonel Jensen. He was waiting for her, his arms crossed. Eva stopped. She did not salute. She was too tired. She simply stood, waiting for the verdict. This was it. The end of her career. The beginning of the questions. Jensen's eyes were hard. He looked past her, at the A-10 parked on the hardstand. He saw the empty pylon. He looked back at her, his gaze intense, searching. He was a man who had read the initial AWACS report. He knew about the broken arrow. He knew about her override code. He knew she had used the exact weapon he had forbidden. He held her gaze for a long 10 seconds. The entire war, her entire career, balanced on the head of that pin. He didn't speak. He didn't yell. He didn't ask a single question. He just gave a single, sharp, almost imperceptible nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not approval. It was acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a commander who knew the cost of the rules and the cost of breaking them. He knew. He turned without a word and walked back into the operations center. Ava let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was all. It was enough. It had to be. She continued to the debriefing room. It was empty, as she knew it would be. The intel officers and lawyers would be scrambled at sunrise. For now, it was just her. She poured a cup of coffee from a pot that had been stewing for hours. It was black, bitter, and cold. She sat at the long, polished table, placing her helmet bag beside her. The gun camera footage would be useless, pure static. Her word and Kincaid's would be the only evidence. There would be a review, an investigation. The Cinder file would be reopened. The word overkill would be written in official reports. She didn't care. She took a sip of the cold coffee. Her quiet fortitude was this: knowing she had done the right thing, and knowing it would never be celebrated. It would only be scrutinized. She had saved a team by sacrificing her reputation and perhaps her career. Vin Quang, Neo Ko, Kong Bao Gyo Tron Ven? Eva Rostova sat alone in the debriefing room, the single overhead light casting a small, sterile pool of light. She held her cold coffee, and she waited for the questions to begin. The debriefing was exactly what she had expected. A sterile room at 0400 lit by harsh fluorescent lights. Colonel Jensen sat opposite her, his face a mask of exhaustion. The AWACS logs were reviewed. Her emergency override code was noted, a stark red entry in the official record. There was a long, heavy silence. Then, Jensen played the audio file. It was a hot mic recording from the CSR team that had extracted Mace, recorded on the medevac helicopter. Kincaid's voice, wrecked by dust and screaming, was barely a whisper. He dictated his AAR. He stated, for the record, that the GBU-31 strike was at his direct, final, and repeated broken arrow order. He stated that the enemy force was inside the wire, that all friendly forces were seconds from being KIA, and that Captain Rostova's action, and that action alone, was the sole reason for their survival. The investigation was swift. The board cleared her. There was no commendation, no medal for saving the day. There was no reprimand for violating the CDE protocol. There was only paperwork, a new ROE addendum for overrun scenarios, and the quiet, heavy understanding. 2 weeks later, Eva walked the flight line in the pale morning light. The port pylon of her A-10 was no longer empty. A fresh GBU-31 was bolted in place. "Heard you were cleared." She turned. It was Kincaid. His arm was in a black sling, and the right side of his face was a map of angry red burns from the flash. He stood awkwardly. Not a JTAC, not a lieutenant, just a man. He looked up at the bomb. I was one of the voices, Captain. Before. I read the Cinder report. I used the word overkill. I thought it was a liability, a lack of control. Eva waited, her gloved hand resting on the nose of the bomb. "Down there," he said, his voice dropping. In the dark, with the dust. When I realized the 500s were useless, I knew there was only one way, and I knew there was probably only one pilot. In this entire theater I could ask. One pilot I knew had the steel to do it, the one I was afraid of. He finally met her gaze. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a raw, harrowing respect. I wasn't just trusting your skill, Reaper. I was trusting your reputation. The word overkill hung between them, transformed. It was no longer her sin. It was her defining strength. Thank you isn't the right word, he finished, his throat tight. It's not required, Mace. He nodded once, sharply, then turned and walked away. Ava finished her pre-flight check. The message of her service was not written in commendations. It would never be spoken aloud in a briefing room. Her quiet fortitude was this: the silent, daily acceptance of the impossible. It was the knowledge that her duty required her to carry the very weapons others feared, and the integrity to use them only when too much was the only thing that was enough. Her strength was not in the bombs she dropped. It was in her willingness to bear the weight of the decision, alone, in the cold air of the cockpit. It was the courage to be the monster in the dark that kept the others safe. She climbed the ladder, the metal rungs cool beneath her boots. She strapped into the titanium tub and sealed the canopy. The world reduced to the green glow of her HUD. She pushed the throttles forward. The A-10, heavy with its full, terrible load, hurtled down the runway and lifted, climbing into the sun-bleached, indifferent sky.